The stars were quiet on the night everything changed. Admiral Una stood on the bridge of her ship, the UE's Remembrance, watching the endless darkness of space through the main window. She was a woman of 53 years, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too many battles. But nothing in her long career had prepared her for what was about to come. The distress signal arrived at 0347 hours. It came from New Sol, humanity's brightest and most beautiful colony, located on a planet called Kepler 442b. 12 million people lived there, under crystal domes that protected them from the harsh atmosphere outside. They had built cities in the mountains. They had raised families. They had created a new home among the stars. Now they were screaming. "Admiral," said Commander Taiho, her first officer. He was a tall man with a calm face, but his voice shook as he spoke. "The signal is coming from the colony's emergency beacon. They say they are under attack." Una turned sharply. "Under attack? By whom?" Taiho swallowed hard. "The Velith Dominion." The name sent a chill through the bridge. Everyone knew the Velith. They were an ancient species that had ruled 17 star systems for over 4,000 years. They had crushed rebellions, destroyed civilizations, and wiped out entire species without mercy. To the Velith, other races were nothing more than insects to be stepped on. And now they had come to New Sol. "Set course immediately," Una ordered. "Maximum speed. Get me there now." The Remembrance jumped into faster-than-light travel, tearing through space toward the distant colony. But even at maximum speed, it would take hours to arrive. Una stood at the window the entire time, watching the stars blur past, praying that she would not be too late. She was. When the ship emerged from hyperspace above Kepler 442b, Una felt her heart stop. Where crystal domes had once sparkled in the sunlight, there was now only glass. The mountains were gone. The cities were gone. Everything was gone. In their place were craters. Massive, glowing craters that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. The surface of the planet looked like it had been burned by the anger of a god. "No," Taiho whispered. No. Una could not speak. She could only stare at the destruction below. 12 million people. 12 million lives. Mothers and fathers. Brothers and sisters. Children who had never hurt anyone. All of them gone. The Velith had not just attacked New Sol. They had erased it. "Admiral," said a young officer at the communications station. Her name was Sujin, and her voice was barely a whisper. "We are receiving a transmission from the colony's recording systems." The Velith. They did not jam the signals. They let everything be recorded. Una closed her eyes for a moment. Of course they did. The Velith were proud of what they had done. They wanted the galaxy to see. "Play it," she said. The main screen flickered to life, and the nightmare began. The footage showed the attack from the very beginning. Velith warships appeared in the sky without warning, blocking out the sun with their massive hulls. They made no demands. They sent no messages. They simply opened fire. Plasma rained down from the heavens like burning rain. Buildings exploded. Streets melted. People ran in every direction, screaming, trying to find shelter that did not exist. The recording showed a group of elderly colonists gathered in a park. They knew they could not run. They knew there was no escape. So they sat together, held hands, and sang old songs from Earth. Songs their grandparents had taught them. Songs about home and hope and love. They were still singing when the fire reached them. Another recording showed a mother running through the streets, carrying her 2 children in her arms. She found a doorway and pressed them against the wall, covering their bodies with her own. She whispered to them that everything would be okay. She told them she loved them. She told them to close their eyes. The plasma struck the building a moment later, but the image that burned itself into Yuna's memory was the last one. A young girl, no older than 7 years old, standing alone in a street filled with smoke and fire. Her name, according to the colony records, was Hannah. She had brown hair and dark eyes and a face that should have been filled with joy. Instead, she stood perfectly still, staring directly at a camera drone that floated nearby. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply looked at the camera as if she wanted to remember everything, as if she wanted the galaxy to remember her. The sky above her turned white as the final bombardment began. Then the screen went dark. The bridge of the remembrance was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Yuna felt tears running down her cheeks, but she did not wipe them away. "The Velith fleet has left the system," Taiho said finally. His voice was hollow, empty. "They are not even running. They are simply leaving. They do not consider us a threat." Yuna turned to face him. Her hands were trembling, but not with fear. It was something else entirely. Something that burned in her chest, like a fire that would never go out. "Send a message to Earth Command," she said. "Priority Omega, the highest level. What should I say?" Taiho asked. Yuna looked back at the ruined world below. She thought of the old people singing. She thought of the mother protecting her children. She thought of little Hannah, standing alone in the fire, looking into the camera with eyes that asked only one question. "Will you remember me?" "Tell them what happened here," Yuna said. "Tell them every detail. Show them every recording. And tell them this." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was cold as ice and hard as steel. "Tell them that humanity remembers." 6 months later, the United Earth Council passed a new law. They called it the Hana Resolution, named after the girl in the footage. The law was simple. It said that no attack on human civilians would ever go unanswered. No enemy would ever be allowed to believe that humanity was weak. No crime against human lives would ever be forgotten. The Velith Dominion had ruled the stars for 4,000 years. They had destroyed countless species and crushed every rebellion. They believed they were invincible, but they had never faced an enemy like humanity. They had never faced a species that carved the names of its dead into monuments. They had never faced a people who taught their children to remember every wound, every loss, every injustice. The Velith thought the matter was finished. They thought humanity would grieve for a while and then move on, accepting their place as a lesser species in a galaxy ruled by the strong. They were very, very wrong. In schools across human space, children learned about New Soul. They learned the names of the dead. They watched the footage and saw what had happened. And they were taught to never forget. "Why do we remember?" Teachers would ask. And the children would answer in one voice. "Because forgetting is how species die." Admiral Yuna returned to Earth and stood before the council. She did not ask for immediate revenge. She did not demand a suicidal attack against the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Instead, she asked for time. "Give us 50 years, she said. "Give us time to build. Time to prepare. Time to become something the Velith cannot imagine. And when we are ready, we will teach them what it means to wound humanity." The council agreed. And so the waiting began. The Velith Dominion expected revenge. In the first months after the burning of New Soul, they prepared for war. They doubled the number of patrol ships along their borders. They built new defense stations around their most important worlds. They trained their soldiers for battle and kept their weapons ready. But the humans never came. Years passed, then decades. The Velith began to relax. Their leaders started to believe that humanity had accepted its place in the galaxy. After all, what could a young species do against an empire that had existed for 4,000 years? The humans were smart enough to know they could not win. At least, that is what the Velith believed. High Arbiter Torvax, the Velith commander who had ordered the destruction of New Sol, became famous throughout the galaxy. He gave interviews to news networks and spoke at important meetings. He was proud of what he had done. The humans needed to learn their place, he said in one famous interview. They were becoming too confident, too ambitious. We simply reminded them of the natural order. The strong rule and the weak obey. When reporters asked about the 12 million dead, Torvax only shrugged. Insects, he said. Nothing more. The galaxy watched and listened. Many species nodded in agreement. This was how things worked. The powerful did as they pleased, and the powerless suffered in silence. But while the galaxy watched Torvax give speeches, it did not see what was happening in the shadows. Commander Jisoo was a small woman with a quiet voice and a gentle smile. She worked in the Human Intelligence Service, and her official job was very boring. She attended parties. She made friends with diplomats from other species. She listened to gossip and remembered every word. No one thought she was dangerous. That was exactly what she wanted. Over 30 years, Jisoo built a network that stretched across the entire galaxy. She found people who hated the Velith. She found species that had been conquered and forced to serve. She found individuals who dreamed of freedom and were willing to take risks. She never threatened anyone. She never demanded loyalty. She simply offered friendship and waited by the time 50 years had passed. Jisoo had agents in every major government, every important company, and every military organization in known space. They reported everything to her: ship movements, defense codes, secret plans, weaknesses. The Velith had no idea that their entire empire had been mapped and studied by a species they considered insects. While Jisoo built her network of spies, Dr. Minho worked on something even more secret. He was a brilliant scientist, one of the smartest humans ever born. His official job was running an agricultural research center on a planet called Vega 7. The center grew new types of crops and developed better farming methods. At least, that is what the public record said. In reality, the underground levels of the research center contained laboratories that did not officially exist. Thousands of engineers and scientists worked there, developing weapons that no one in the galaxy had ever imagined. They created plasma cannons that could cut through Velith shields like paper. They designed missiles that could think for themselves and find their targets no matter how fast they moved. They built armor that could stop any weapon the Velith possessed. And they did all of this in complete secrecy. When will we use these weapons? A young engineer asked Minho one day. Minho smiled. When the time is right. Not one day sooner, not one day later. But how will we know when the time is right? Minho looked at the engineer with calm, patient eyes. Trust me, he said. We will know. The ships were built in the asteroid belts of the Sol system, hidden among millions of rocks where no one would think to look. Fleet Admiral Yuna, now old but still sharp, oversaw the construction personally. She watched as the greatest fleet humanity had ever created took shape in the darkness. Between worlds, the flagship was a monster. 3 kilometers long, painted black, covered in weapons that could destroy entire fleets. They named it the U.S. Hana after the girl in the footage. And on its hull, in letters too small to see from a distance, they carved the names of everyone who had died on New Sol. 12 million names. 12 million reminders of why they were fighting. Yuna walked the halls of the ship every day, running her fingers over the names. She was 87 years old now. Her hair was white. Her body was tired, but her eyes still burned with the same fire that had ignited 50 years ago. Will I live to see it? She asked Taiho one evening. He was old too now, but still loyal, still by her side. I do not know, he answered honestly. But even if you do not, someone will. The plan is bigger than any of us. Yuna nodded. That is exactly how it should be. Perhaps the most important work was done not in laboratories or shipyards, but in schools. Every human child learned about New Soul. They watched the footage. They saw the fire falling from the sky. They saw the mothers protecting their children. They saw little Hana standing alone in the burning streets, and they remembered. Why do we remember? Teachers asked in every classroom on every human world. Because forgetting is how species die, the children answered. The lessons were not about hatred. Teachers did not tell children to hate the Veleth. Instead, they taught children to remember the value of every human life. They taught them that 12 million people had been killed simply because someone more powerful they did not matter. And they taught them that this could never be allowed to happen again. The children grew up and had children of their own. Those children learned the same lessons. Generation after generation, the memory was passed down like a sacred treasure. On Earth, in a quiet building that looked like an ordinary office, a group of planners worked day and night. They studied every possible future. They considered every possible mistake. They prepared for every possible problem. What if the Veleth discover our fleet? One planner asked. They will not, another answered. We have been too careful. But what if they do? There was a pause. Then the senior planner, an old man named Jinsu, smiled. If they discover our fleet, they will finally understand their mistake. But by then, it will already be too late. 50 years. That was how long humanity waited. 50 years of silence, of smiles, of trade agreements and diplomatic handshakes. 50 years of building, preparing, training. The Veleth gave interviews and boasted about their power. They celebrated their empire and dreamed of further expansion. They forgot about the humans, dismissing them as a defeated species that had learned its lesson. High Arbiter Torvax grew old and fat, surrounded by luxury and praise. He never thought about New Soul anymore. Why would he? It was ancient history, a footnote in the glorious story of the Veleth Dominion. But humanity had not forgotten. They had simply been waiting, and now, after 50 years, the waiting was almost over. Fleet Admiral Yuna sat in her quarters aboard the Hana, looking at a picture of the girl the ship was named after. The image showed a child with brown hair and dark eyes, standing in fire, staring at the camera. Soon, Yuna whispered to the picture. Very soon now. She placed the picture on her desk and stood up slowly, her old bones aching. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the hidden fleet floating in the darkness. 2,000 ships. The greatest military force humanity had ever assembled, and not a single enemy knew they existed. Yuna smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a woman who had waited half a century for revenge and was finally about to get it. Memory is our weapon, she said softly, and the Veleth are about to learn what it means to be remembered. In the distance, the engines of the Hana began to glow. The long silence was about to end. High Arbiter Torvax died in his sleep on a warm summer night. He was surrounded by his family, his treasures, and his memories of conquest. The doctors said it was peaceful. He felt no pain. The Veleth Dominion declared a week of mourning. Torvax was celebrated as a hero, a great leader who had kept the empire strong for decades. Statues were built in his honor. Songs were sung about his victories. No one mentioned New Soul. Why would they? That was ancient history. On the same day that Torvax died, humanity declared war. It began not with guns or missiles, but with silence. Across 17 star systems, everything the Veleth depended on began to fail. Supply ships vanished from their routes. Communication systems went dark. Defense satellites stopped responding to commands. Power stations shut down without warning. Commander Jisu's network had finally activated. For 30 years, she had placed agents in every important position. Now, with a single signal, they all acted at once. The new High Arbiter, a young commander named Vectis, sat in his throne room on Velith Prime when the first reports arrived. He was tall and proud, with sharp eyes and sharper teeth. He had dreamed of this position his whole life. Now, on his very first day in power, everything was falling apart. "What is happening?" he demanded. "We do not know, High Arbiter," a frightened officer replied. "Our systems are failing everywhere. We cannot contact our border fleets." "We cannot." The main screen in the throne room suddenly flickered to life. A human face appeared, old, wrinkled, with white hair and eyes that burned like stars. Fleet Admiral Yuna. "Greetings, High Arbiter Vectis," she said. Her voice was calm, almost friendly. "I apologize for the interruption. I know you must be very busy today." Vectis stared at the screen in shock. How had a human taken control of his own communication systems? "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Yuna smiled. It was not a warm smile. 53 years ago, your predecessor burned a world called New Sol. He killed 12 million people. Men, women, and children. He recorded their deaths because he was proud of what he had done. She paused, and her smile faded. "We recorded something too. We recorded our promise. We told you that humanity remembers." The lights in the throne room flickered. Through the massive windows, Vectis could see the sky above Velith Prime beginning to darken. "Look outside," Yuna said softly. Vectis walked slowly to the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. Ships, thousands of ships, appearing from nothing, filling the sky like a swarm of angry insects. They were painted black, invisible against the void until they revealed themselves. And at the front of the formation was a monster. A ship 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons, with strange markings covering its hull. The U.S. Hana had arrived. Captain Junho stood on the bridge of the Hana, watching the planet below. He was 47 years old, with steady hands and a calm heart. His grandmother had died on New Sol. He had grown up looking at her, picture and listening to stories about the world that no longer existed. Now he was here to deliver humanity's answer. "All ships," he said into the fleet-wide communication channel, "begin the operation. Show them what human memory looks like." 2,000 vessels moved as one. They had trained for this moment for decades. Every pilot knew exactly what to do. Every gunner knew exactly where to aim. The Velith defense fleet rushed to meet them. It was a large force, hundreds of warships with experienced crews. On any normal day, they would have been terrifying. But this was not a normal day. Human weapons fired, and Velith shields shattered like glass. Human missiles flew, and Velith engines exploded. The technology Minho had developed in secret was beyond anything the Velith could understand or counter. The battle lasted 6 hours. In the first 90 minutes, the Velith military was broken. Their defense stations were destroyed. Their shipyards were reduced to rubble. Their weapons factories burned. But the humans did not stop there. For the remaining hours, they systematically took apart everything the Velith Dominion had used to project power. Every military base, every weapons storage facility, every training center. When it was over, the Velith Dominion had no military left at all. And yet, through it all, not a single civilian was harmed. This was perhaps the most confusing part for the Velith. Human medical ships descended on their colonies, treating wounded soldiers and providing supplies to frightened citizens. Human engineers helped repair power stations and water systems. Human diplomats landed with food and medicine. The humans were conquering them and helping them at the same time. High Arbiter Vectis was captured without a fight. He expected to be executed immediately. That was what the Velith would have done to a defeated enemy leader. Instead, he was brought aboard the Remembrance, the old ship that had witnessed the destruction of New Sol so many years ago. He was led into a simple meeting room where Fleet Admiral Una was waiting. She looked even older in person, 88 years old, with white hair and wrinkled skin. But her eyes were sharp and clear, and her voice was strong. "Sit down," she said. It was not a request. Vectis sat. "You could destroy us," he said after a long moment of silence. "You could do to Velith Prime what we did to your colony. You could kill billions of our people in revenge. Why have you not done this?" Una looked at him for a long time before answering. "Because that is the difference between us," she said finally. "Your predecessor burned New Sol because he thought we were beneath him. He saw our people as insects. He believed that power meant he could do whatever he wanted." She leaned forward. "We are ending your empire because what you did was wrong. Not because we want revenge. Not because we want to prove we are strong. Because it was wrong. And the moment we become what you were, we lose the right to call ourselves human." Vectis shook his head slowly. "I do not understand. You waited 50 years. You built this incredible fleet. You defeated us completely. And now you are showing mercy?" "Mercy is not weakness," Una replied. "Mercy is proof of strength. Anyone can destroy. Anyone can kill. But it takes real power to choose not to." She stood up and walked to a window that showed the stars outside. "Your dominion is finished. Your military is gone. Your leaders will face trial for what was done to New Sol, but your people will live. They will rebuild. And maybe, in time, they will become something better than they were." Vectis stared at her back. "You waited 50 years just to show mercy?" Una turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable. "We waited 50 years to make sure you would never forget. Mercy is how we remind you that we are not monsters. But patience? Precision? Planning?" She stepped closer, and for a moment, Vectis saw the fire that had been burning in her eyes for over half a century. "That is how we remind you to never wound us again." Vectis sat in silence for a long time after she left. He thought about everything he had believed about humans. He had been taught they were weak, primitive, unimportant. He had been taught that the strong ruled and the weak obeyed. But the humans had just proven they were the strongest force in the galaxy. And instead of using that strength to destroy, they were using it to rebuild. He did not understand them. He was not sure he ever would. But as he sat in that small room, surrounded by the hum of a human warship, he knew one thing for certain. The galaxy would never be the same again. On the bridge of the Hana, Captain Junho stood alone, looking out at Velith Prime. The planet glowed softly in the light of its sun. Billions of people lived down there, people who had nothing to do with what happened 53 years ago. His grandmother would never know that he had been here. She had died long before he was born, in flames that fell from the sky. But he carried her memory, just as all humans did. "We did it," he whispered to her. "We remembered. And we did it right." He touched the hull of the ship gently, feeling the names carved into the metal. 12 million names. 12 million stories that would never be finished. But humanity's story continued. And it was only just beginning. Every surviving officer who had participated in the destruction of New Sol was brought before the Galactic Court. This court was made of representatives from over 200 species. They came from all across known space to witness something that had never happened before. For the first time in galactic history, a great empire was being held responsible for its crimes. The courtroom was massive. A great dome floating in space, built specifically for this event. Thousands of beings filled the seats, watching as the accused were brought forward one by one. Most of them were old now, their scales faded and their movements slow. They had thought they would die as heroes. Now they would die as criminals. Prosecutor Yumbi stood at the center of the chamber. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a voice that could fill any room. Her grandfather had been a doctor on New Seoul. He had refused to leave when the evacuation began, choosing to stay and help the wounded until the very end. He was still treating patients when the fire reached him. Yumbi did not speak of revenge in her opening statement. She did not talk about hatred or anger. Instead, she talked about memory. The Veleth believed that power meant they could erase whatever they wished, she said, her voice steady and clear. They believed that history was written by the victors. They believed that the dead had no voice. She paused, looking around the chamber at the hundreds of species watching. They were wrong. She touched a button, and the footage from New Seoul began to play. The same footage that had haunted humanity for over 50 years. The fire falling from the sky. The people running and screaming. The elderly singing in the park. The mother protecting her children. Little Hannah standing alone in the burning street that many in the audience looked away. Some cried. Others sat in stunned silence. 12 million voices, Yumbi continued when the footage ended. 12 million people who were killed because someone thought they did not matter. But we remember them. Every single one. And today, we ask this court to remember them too. The trials continued for months. Witness after witness came forward. Not just humans, but members of other species as well. Species that the Veleth had conquered. Species that had lost their own worlds to Veleth cruelty. Species that had been too afraid to speak until now. One witness was an old being from a planet called Tharia. His species had been enslaved by the Veleth 200 years ago. He had spent his entire life in chains, forced to work in factories and mines. When I heard what the humans did, he said, his voice shaking with emotion, I thought it was a dream. No one defeats the Veleth. No one stands up to them. But the humans did. And they did not become conquerors themselves. They set us free. Another witness was a young female from a water world called Naria. The Veleth had poisoned her planet's oceans, killing millions of her people. We thought we were alone, she said. We thought no one cared. But then the humans came with medicine and engineers. They helped us clean our water. They helped us rebuild. They asked for nothing in return. She looked at Yumbi with large, grateful eyes. Why? She asked. Why did you help us? We are not your people. Yumbi smiled gently. Because you were hurt. And that was enough. The convictions came one by one. Every officer who had participated in the destruction of New Seoul was found guilty of crimes against sentient life. It was the highest crime recognized by galactic law. The punishments were carried out quietly, away from cameras and crowds. Humanity had insisted on this. They do not deserve the dignity of martyrdom. Fleet Admiral Yuna had said before the trials began. Let them fade into obscurity. Let history remember their victims instead. And so it was done. After the trials, something unexpected happened. Species from all across the galaxy began approaching humanity with new respect. Not because humans had won a war. Wars were won all the time. But because humans had done something no one had ever seen before. They had ended an ancient empire without becoming conquerors themselves. The Veleth homeworld was returned to its people within a decade. Human advisors helped rebuild their government, teaching them about democracy and freedom. Human teachers established schools that taught new ways of thinking. Human doctors built hospitals and trained local healers. It was not easy. Many Veleth hated the humans. They saw them as destroyers who had taken everything away. Generations of pride and power erased in a single day. But slowly, things began to change. Captain Junho retired from the Navy and became an ambassador. His first posting was to Veleth Prime itself. May thought he was crazy for accepting such a dangerous assignment. "They will try to kill you," his aide, Lieutenant Sujin, warned him during the shuttle descent to the planet. "They hate us. They blame us for everything." Junho nodded calmly. "Of course they do. We destroyed everything they believed about themselves. Their pride, their power, their identity. They need someone to hate. Then why accept this posting?" Junho looked out the window at the approaching planet. Once it had been the heart of a great empire. Now it was struggling to find its place in a galaxy that had moved on without it. "Because hatred fades," he said. "Fear fades. But memory endures. In 50 years, in 100 years, the Velith will remember what we did here. Some will remember the war and the destruction. But some will remember that we helped them rebuild. That we treated them with respect. That we did not become monsters." He turned to Sujin with a small smile. "And those memories will matter." Sujin was quiet for a moment. "You think we can make them our allies someday? I think we can make them our friends. And friends are worth more than victories." The years passed. Fleet Admiral Yuna died at the age of 92, surrounded by family and former crew members. Her last words were about New Soul. "Remember them," she whispered. "Always remember them." Her funeral was broadcast across human space. Billions watched as her body was placed in a small ship and sent into the sun. She had asked for this, saying she wanted to become light that would shine forever. Commander Jisoo continued her work until she was too old to travel. She spent her final years writing a book about her life, though most of the interesting parts had to remain secret. She died peacefully at the age of 101. Dr. Minho's weapons were never used again. After the war, he focused on creating new technologies that help people instead of killing them. He developed farming equipment that could grow food in the harshest environments. He invented medical devices that could heal wounds that were once fatal. He was awarded every prize humanity could offer. When asked about his work during the war, he always said the same thing: "I made tools for a job that needed to be done. Now the job is finished, and we can build something better." On Velith Prime, Ambassador Junho served for 20 years. He learned their language and their customs. He ate their food and celebrated their holidays. He made friends among people who had once been enemies. When he finally retired, there was a small ceremony in the capital city. Hundreds of Velith came to say goodbye. Some of them had been soldiers who fought against him. Now they called him brother. "You are strange beings," one of them said to him. "You defeated us completely. You could have ruled us forever. But instead, you helped us become free." Junho smiled. "That is what friends do." The Velith looked at him for a long moment. "I think I am beginning to understand you," he said finally. "You do not fight to conquer. You fight to remember. And you remember so that no one has to fight again." Junho nodded slowly. "Now you understand," he said. "Now you truly understand." Back on Earth, in schools and homes and offices, humanity continued to remember. Children still learned about New Soul. They still watched the footage. They still saw little Hana standing in the fire. But now they also learned what came after. They learned about the war that was won without cruelty. They learned about the empire that was defeated and then helped to rebuild. They learned about the enemies who became friends. Why do we remember? Teachers still asked Dot, and the children still answered. Because forgetting is how species die. But now there was more to the lesson. Now they also learned that memory was not just about pain. It was about hope. It was about becoming better. It was about making sure that the same mistakes were never made again. The weight of memory was heavy, but humanity had learned to carry it with grace. 200 years had passed since the burning of New Soul. Humanity had changed in those years. They had grown. They had spread across the stars. They had made friends with species they once feared, and enemies with species they had never met. They had experienced joy and sorrow, victory and defeat, love and loss. But they had never forgotten. In the Kepler 442 system, on the exact coordinates where New Sol had once stood, humanity built something that would last forever. They called it the Memorial. It was a sphere of crystalline metal, 2 kilometers in diameter, floating in space where the colony had once thrived. Inside the sphere were the names and faces of every soul who had died, not just on New Sol, but in every act of violence against humanity throughout history. Millions upon millions of names, shining like stars in an endless night. The dedication ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy. Ships came from every corner of known space to witness the event. Velith and human, old enemies and new friends, all gathered to remember. Director Mireille of the Remembrance Foundation stood at the central podium. She was 147 years old, one of the last humans alive who had personal memories of the war. Her silver hair gleamed under the artificial lights, and her voice was still strong and clear. "We built this monument not as a warning," she said, "but as a promise." Behind her, holographic images began to cycle through the sphere. Faces appeared, one after another, young and old, soldiers and civilians, scientists and artists, children who never grew up and elders who died too soon. Humanity does not forget our wounds. We carry them with us always. But we have learned something in the centuries since New Sol, something that the Velith and their kind never understood. She paused, looking out at the assembled delegates from hundreds of species. Memory is not the same as hatred. Remembering a wound does not mean you must keep bleeding. We remember so that we can heal properly. We remember so that the same wounds are never inflicted again. Not on us and not by us. In the audience, an elderly Velith sat beside his human companion. His name was Torvex. He was a descendant of the High Arbiter who had ordered the burning of New Sol so many generations ago. Torvex had spent his entire life trying to understand humans. He had studied their history, learned their languages, lived among them for decades. And still, they puzzled him. The woman beside him was named Bora. She was young, only 32, a historian who specialized in human-Velith relations. They had met at a conference and become friends. "I still do not fully understand," Torvex said quietly, watching the ceremony. "Your people could have enslaved us, could have destroyed us. You had every right after what my ancestor did. But you did not." Laura looked at him with an expression he had learned to recognize as fondness. "My grandmother used to tell me something," she said. "She said that the measure of a species is not how they treat their friends. It is how they treat their enemies after they have already won." She gestured at the memorial, glowing softly in the darkness of space. "That is what this is. Not a shrine to vengeance. A promise that we will never become what hurt us. That we will remember the wound, but we will also remember our own humanity." Torvex thought about this for a long time. "On my world," he said finally, "we were taught that mercy was weakness. That the strong must crush the weak, or they will be crushed in turn. But you are the strongest species in the galaxy now. And yet, you show mercy to everyone. Even to us," Bora nodded slowly. "Because true strength is not about destroying others. It is about choosing not to destroy, even when you can. It is about building instead of burning, healing instead of hurting." She smiled. "My grandmother also used to say that anyone can break things. Even a child can break things. But it takes wisdom to create. It takes courage to forgive. And it takes strength to remember without hating." "The rector." Mare's voice echoed across the gathered crowd and through the vast. network of communication satellites that carried her words to every corner of the galaxy. Let this monument stand as testament to what humanity chooses to be. We are not perfect. We are not always kind. We make mistakes, as all beings do. But we are eternal in our memory, and that memory makes us who we are. She lifted her hand toward the sphere. For the 12 million of new soul, for everyone who came before them and everyone who came after, for all the souls who were taken too soon by violence and cruelty. We remember you. We will always remember you. The sphere blazed with light. 12 million individual lights ignited within it, one for each soul lost on New Soul. They glowed like a galaxy of tiny stars, visible even from the surface of nearby planets. And for those who would harm humanity in the future, Myre continued, her voice dropping to something quieter but somehow more powerful, let this monument also serve as a reminder. We do not forget. We never forget. And our memory is stronger than any weapon ever built. She paused, and when she spoke again, her words carried the weight of 2 centuries. We remember. We always will. And that is why we will never fall. The ceremony ended, but the memorial remained. Ships passing through the region would change their routes just to see it. A glowing sphere in the darkness, bearing witness to a wound that had become a foundation. Travelers would stop and look at the names, reading them one by one, trying to imagine the lives that had been cut short. Some visitors left flowers, floating in protective bubbles around the sphere. Others left letters, messages to loved ones long dead. Still others simply sat in silence, thinking about what it all meant. Over the following decades, other species began to build their own memorials. The Therians created a garden on their homeworld, filled with plants from every planet they had lost to conquest. The Nereans built an underwater temple where they sang songs of remembrance. Even the Velith, after many generations, erected a monument to the species they had destroyed before learning better. The galaxy was changing. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Species that had once killed each other without thought were learning to talk instead. Empires that had ruled through fear were learning to lead through respect. Old hatreds were fading, replaced by new friendships. Humanity watched these changes with quiet satisfaction. They did not claim credit. They did not demand recognition. They simply continued to remember, as they always had. In a small house on Earth, Bora sat with Torvex on a warm summer evening. They were both old now, their lives nearly spent. But they still enjoyed watching the sunset together, talking about the past and wondering about the future. Do you think it will last? Torvex asked. This peace? This understanding? Bora considered the question carefully. Nothing lasts forever, she said finally. Species rise and fall. Empires grow and crumble. Even stars eventually burn out and die. She turned to look at her old friend. But memory can last. As long as one being remembers, the past is never truly gone. And as long as we remember both the pain and the healing, we can always find our way back to peace. Torvex nodded slowly. The humans taught us that, he said. My people ruled for 4,000 years, and we never understood it. But you understood from the beginning. Bora smiled. We learned it the hard way, through fire and loss and grief. But we learned. And now we share what we learned with others. She looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. That is the true power of memory. Not revenge. Not hatred. But wisdom. The wisdom to remember what hurts, so we can prevent it from happening again. The wisdom to remember what heals, so we can keep doing it forever. Far away, in the darkness between stars, the memorial continued to shine. 12 million lights, burning eternally, visible across light years. Ships passed by daily, their crews pausing to look at the monument that had become one of the most famous structures in the galaxy. And in schools across human space, teachers still ask the ancient question, why do we remember? And children still answered, as they always would, because forgetting is how species die. But now there was more. Now the lesson continued. And why do we not hate? Because hatred is how souls die. And what do we do with our memories? We use them to build. We use them to heal. We use them to become better than we were. The teacher would nod, satisfied. Yes, that is the human way. We remember everything. We forgive when we can. We rebuild what was broken. And we never, ever stop trying to be better. The children would look at each other, understanding only a little of what they had been taught. But they would remember. They would carry the lesson with them, and one day, they would teach it to their own children. That was the promise. That was the power. That was the gift of memory. And as long as one human heart beat somewhere in the cosmos, the 12 million of new soul would live on. Not as ghosts demanding vengeance, but as lights guiding humanity home. Empires rise and fall. Species bloom and fade. Stars themselves grow cold and die. But memory endures forever.